Welcome back to another episode of PBO Perspectives and Business, Finance, and HR. Join us as we break down the complex business topics of the day and share practical tips for maximizing efficiencies and increasing profitability. I'm Joey McCoy, and today we'll be discussing the top things to consider when organizing a volunteer initiative or charity effort for a business. Fran and Rachel are back with us today, and I know they both have lots of insight on the benefits of being a benevolent business. Lots of B's there in that sentence. Fran San Diego serves as the new CEO of PBO Advisory Group, and Rachel Allen is one of PBO's expert consultants on the HR side of things. Hi, Fran and Rachel. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me back.
Thank you for coming. So we wanted to talk today about something that gets brought up a lot, and that's companies that want to basically start a new initiative to give back to the community. So if somebody does, if you do have a client that comes to you and says that they want to start giving back to the community, and it's kind of just a generic, vague, topic, how do you kind of narrow that down for them? And what do you all suggest? What have been things that have been successful in that avenue?
Well, I think first off, it's really important to determine what is important to your employees and what fits within your current culture and what you're trying to achieve. You want to make sure that the initiative that you're going to introduce is going to be something that your employees are passionate about, want to be involved with, and care about. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to be impacting the culture within your organization. It's also very important to make sure that your policies and procedures that you have in place for your employees match the vision that you're trying to do when you're trying to better serve the community.
Yeah, so you're talking about selection of an actual organization that you're giving back to, right? It's like, So like the Burlington Coat Factory would probably not want, pick PETA as their primary organization that they are giving their donations to. But Fran, what would be the first step that you would recommend from an accounting perspective on that?
I think the most important piece is the culture connect that Rachel is talking about, and making sure that we have buy-in in the organization. And then we look at budgets, of course, and we look at what is the discretionary dollars and or resources that we would be able to attribute to this particular initiative. We can also look at incentives. There are many programs in place for employers for tax incentives, such as hiring veterans or workforce training plans, or working with underserved or underprivileged communities, if that's an initiative that a company is interested in. So first we start with, what is really impactful for that company, for their brand, for their people. And from there, we can start to create a budget and look for the potential opportunities to offset those costs of the program with incentives, because there are many.
Yeah, and you brought up a budget. So, when people have the idea of like giving back and it's a charity, a volunteer program, they think there won't be a cost to it, but there is a cost to some of these things. I guess it depends how you set it up, but what would be kind of like a ballpark estimate in terms of budgeting for something like this?
Right. So, we look at, it depends on the company. Some companies, if they're consumer facing, they use it as a marketing tool and say a percentage of my net proceeds are attributed to program XYZ.
Or match whatever.
Exactly. Or, we have an initiative and we do a drive and we say, okay, we would like to raise $10,000 for program XYZ. So there's so many ways we can go about it. Here internally at PBO, we actually budget a portion of time of each of our employees and say, we have a paid volunteer time off program, but we also allocate 2 days a year where we hope that our employees will attend our volunteer activity, and we go and we have a good time together and we paid them.
Yeah.
Well, and yes, sometimes it's a Saturday morning because we have client responsibilities, or we try and do it early in the morning. We've done a beach cleanup at like 7 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wow.
We've done we did a really fun playground cleanup at a Y on a Saturday morning. So it really depends because as you know, we have employees that have numerous obligations during the workday. So we try to coordinate it so it works with everyone's schedule.
And what Fran's talking about here in the team going and doing a volunteer event together also is really good team bonding and team building experiences for coworkers to be doing together. So it's important that when you're selecting the activity, that it's something that's going to get the most involvement and the most people are going to care about, so that you can have participation at a team building event such as this volunteer activity.
Yeah, participation is so important. Otherwise, what's the point? If nobody's participating, why bother? But I think, we're always hearing about how companies want to save money and cut back costs and everything. So I guess let's look at the free options first that a company can enact that won't cost them anything. So you said a Saturday, beach cleanup, for example. Rachel, what do you need to look at in terms of having an event on their time off? What does that look like?
You need to look at and see if it's truly voluntary.
Yes. Okay.
Otherwise, you're going to have to pay the employee their wages for attending a work-related event. There is going to be somebody within the organization, likely that is the contact that is running the event. So that person is probably going to have to be paid to be there. But somebody who is, if you're telling your employees this is strictly voluntary, you don't have to come. There's truly no repercussions if they don't come. But we'd love to have you here, and this is what we're all going to do if this is something you care about. Then that's truly a volunteer event, and they don't have to be there. You don't have to pay them. But if, like I said, there's going to be someone within the organization that's responsible for running the event. And if that's a non-exempt employee, then they're going to need to be compensated. Because
even the implication that they have to be there, right, could be problematic. It really does need to be explicitly laid out, right?
Yes.
In writing, I would recommend.
I definitely recommend. Yeah, I definitely recommend in the email announcement clarifying that this is strictly voluntary. You can come for as long or short as you want to be there, and then you have to make sure that your managers are not pressuring people that they have to attend.
We also we like to make these events, I mean, internally, and every company is different, but we have a company that has lots of children, family members, and so we try to open these types of functions up to your loved ones and your significant others. Hopefully you can bring your four-legged sometimes if that works with the
if they can pick up trash.
Exactly. So we try, and so like with PBO, we did poll the employees first and say, what is meaningful and important to you? And working with children was at the top.
Okay.
So we then went out into the community to find out the needs of, the children's organizations in town to say, and so it was like children, environment, and then animals, I think was third. So we have a pretty consistent workforce where that's important to them. It could be different in a different, community. And I do have a client, we have a lot of construction clients. And so they are really skilled and can add a lot of value to certain organizations. And so Habitat for Humanity, for instance, is a really nice fit for them. They can bring their skill, they can bring a lot of value to an organization. So it really, again, it depends on your culture and what is the most meaningful to your organization and the people who will be doing the work.
Partnering with an already existing organization is a good way for small and mid-sized businesses to get out there and be able to help as well, instead of trying to start up something all on their own. Partnering with what's already available out there within the community and just lending a helping hand is a really good way to be involved.
If this is a free event, or if this is an event, on their own time that they could volunteer for, what if somebody gets injured while they're cleaning up on the beach?
It's a really good question. I was putting my CFO risk management hat on. They are covered.
They are.
Under workers'
Okay, that's good to know.
compensation, because they're at a work function, it's a work event.
Mhm.
We should really let our insurance broker know that we're having these types of activities when we're binding our policies, so that they understand, the underwriters understand all of the things that we do. But absolutely, insurance is important. If you don't have it, you need to have it. But those are things that would be covered under the employer's policy.
Yeah, to that note, it's important to keep the event in country. I mean, we're in San Diego, we're pretty close to Mexico. So if you're looking to go and, you know, provide some volunteer work within Mexico, that's something you're going to need to check with your workers' comp carrier before you go, to see if you're going to be covered out of country, because likely you are not.
Yeah, and then that brings up a whole slew of other questions, probably for another episode. But okay, so there is those free event, like, you know, even a food drive or a clothing drive. Those are just things that don't cost the company anything that they can do. But then there's the things that I guess would bring a cost, and then that you would need a budget for, and that could even be when they're, you know, getting paid. Like, so they are taking a Friday off to go volunteer for the day, and the company is paying them like a PTO day for it. What does that process look like? How do you know how many days to give to them? Does it have to be company sponsored, or can they just do anything that they want? What does that usually look like?
It's going to have to be defined well in your policy about it that you have. I know with PBO, we have a policy where you do get a set amount of hours to do any kind of volunteer, as long as, you know, it's, you know, volunteering for something that is giving back to the community. And a lot of times I'd recommend that within the policy, it would say, if you have questions about this specific activity, to reach out and ask if that specific activity is covered, to get approval for it. If it's something that's not the whole organization doing, if you're doing it on your own as an individual. But it's really important to have the policy written and clearly defined on what is the intention of the organization for the employees to go and volunteer.
And we really like to get photos. So if someone's doing a volunteer event, we'd like to get photos.
Otherwise it never happened, right?
Share it on the internet.
Yeah,
it's a way for us to bond and say, oh, you know, our senior staff accountant just did a bike ride for MS, or our HR director just volunteered for, you know, a beach cleanup. And it's fun to get those photos, even if we're sharing it in our intranet, our company intranet, and places like that.
And it inspires other people to want to get involved, because they're like, look how much fun that was, you know, last week. I want to do the next one. So I think pictures are really important.
Yeah, I do have another client who is really committed to the military community here in town. Of course, San Diego has a very large military presence, and there are a lot of folks that are coming out of the military and looking for work opportunities. And so there is an enormous potential of workforce development, training, and incentive for you to hire those types of folks. And not only because, you know, they need jobs, we want to support our military folks, but also because there are tax incentives for that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting, because we're talking pretty standard options, but there are some really creative. Some companies have gotten really creative in the ways that they give back. I worked at SeaWorld once upon a time in another life, and they would give bus passes for, you know, people that were underprivileged to be able to get to work and not have to pay for transportation. Is there any other like creative things that you've kind of, you know, had clients come up with that you would like to put out there and suggest?
Well, I don't have a client, but I am very fascinated and would love to learn more about some of the programs where, you know, large corporations are hiring underserved workforce folks and training them up. And we don't really have any big clients like that, but it is of interest to me. And so maybe a topic for another conversation.
I do know that there are some government organizations as well that will provide some subsidy for wages if you're hiring someone who's currently receiving unemployment. So that's something to look at.
That is a great tip. Yeah.
Within each county, to see if that is an option to help, lower the unemployment rate in your area.
I also think, in a company's recruiting efforts, they could also probably target communities that maybe aren't being reached out to as much, right? Like local areas of the community that don't, there's job fairs all around, right? And I guess it's just where you send your crew to.
There's another thing that is of interest, which is in your industry, there are often programs that are more applicable to your industry.
Yeah.
So for instance, in California, there's a new law that was passed that allows restaurants to donate their overages of food. So while that is, you're not employing anybody, but you're giving back to your community
In a huge way.
And there are programs that are in place, nonprofit organizations who are implementing the program. So your industry colleagues are a great resource for you to say, how can I incorporate what I'm doing today to give back to my community? And
that is goes back to the things that don't cost the company anything, right? Like if they already have the surplus, it's going to go in the trash. I mean, you might as well donate it and get credit for that. And I think that's a great option for companies. Do you have any other things that you all, I also think like targeting an audience, like if there's members of if you have employees that live in a certain part of the community, or they're taking public transportation to get to work, maybe posting job ads that are on the buses or like in those locations that, they're going to see versus like just doing an ad on LinkedIn. I think it's like, important to get the message out in those ways.
It's really important that your endeavor that you're trying to do matches what your employees want, matches your culture,
the workforce,
matches the vision that you have. Because if you're just out there in the community doing something, like let's say you support working mothers, but you only do the bare minimum for a maternity leave, or you don't offer any kind of paternity leave, then that's not really doing what you say you want to support. So it's really important that your policies and your organizational culture matches what it is you're trying to achieve out in the community.
And then with that, the selection of the charities that you're giving back to. Now, is there maybe a rotation that you would put them on, or do you recommend always sticking with the same one every event? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's good to mix it up.
Yeah.
Because depending on the size of your organization, not every employee is gonna have the same care about the same organization. So it's important to hit the different ones. So it would be good to mix it up as long as it's within meeting the same goal and mission of what you're trying to achieve. And as long as it still matches your company values, going to different specific organizations, I think is a good thing.
So there can be some tax benefits, right, to these kind of programs. Fran, do you want to talk a little bit about those and how these can actually, sometimes they're not just a cost, right? They're actually going to help the company. Yeah.
So there's workforce training plans if you're hiring underserved folks, and as Rachel said, there's also some tax incentives for really looking out to unemployed folks and reducing the unemployment rate. There are tax incentives for veterans and hiring veterans.
Donationable or charitable donations.
Charitable donations. You get 50% of whatever you donate is a tax deduction to you.
And now does that, like, let's say you had a food drive, if those are actually products now, does that work for that too? Or is that?
So if you purchase the products and then you donate them, 50% of that is tax deductible. We don't, people's time is a little trickier.
That is tricky, yeah.
So
it's still valuable though.
It's valuable, but it's not really something that you book as a donation. However, for us, it's a business expense, so it's 100% deductible as a payroll expense.
That's great.
Course. So, really depends how you treat it and what you're doing, but for the most part, a lot of the expenses can be a tax deduction.
And then do those tax deductions usually outweigh any potential costs that a company is incurring up for it?
So, there's the hard dollar cost,
Yeah,
and then there's the intangible costs, and we look at them holistically. And so, a straight donation, you get a 50% of your donation is tax deductible. However, the intangible benefit of retention in employees, happy employees, engaged employees. You had mentioned, we have employees that are whole people. So they have work, they have home, they have philanthropy, they have all of those things. So we see this as an intangible benefit that is priceless.
Yeah, because in my past, I have had jobs that I feel like I don't have a purpose. Like no one's really benefiting from what I'm doing. And it just makes you feel like, the value you're bringing to the world isn't as high as some of these nonprofit people that work for nonprofits, they bring so much value and so there are people in those positions that being involved in a volunteer program and giving back to their community would be really meaningful for them, I think. What time frame do you look at if you were to start an initiative like this? What kind of time frame do you, from point A to the launch date, how long do you think it usually takes?
I think that it depends on exactly what it is you're trying to launch, but you would want to make sure that you have a timeline set with metrics and and deadlines of when you want to meet. And you're going to start with polling your employees to see what's important. And if it's we need donations to this cause, then that isn't going to take very long. But if it's rolling out some kind of program of we all want to go build a house with Habitat for Humanity, then you're going to need to go and see what their timetable is like and when the next opportunity is that comes up. But it shouldn't take too long to get at least the policy and the plan in place of what it is that you want to do. It's about making a decision.
Some of those decisions revolve around things that may go in the employee handbook, right? So if you're giving people, if you have volunteer days that are considered PTO days, how do the laws work with that? Can you accrue those or do they reset every year? How does that work?
You could accrue them, you could reset them. It depends how you want to set your policy. It's not something that's going to need to be paid out at the time of termination because it's not considered a wage. It's considered volunteer time off. It's very specific and defined what it is you're going to be use it for. So you just need to make sure you have a written policy and do what your policy says. Have you ever been in a situation where you questioned whether someone actually did the volunteer work? And how do you verify that? Well, as Fran said, pictures are always a really nice there's another reason. You can also, word of mouth, hearing your employees talk about it. You always can casually ask them, how did that go? Tell me something about it, but you don't want to interrogate. Do you have an approval form that you get somebody to sign, or? You can, or it can be an email as well. Something in writing that this is what I'm going to go do on this date, and then if you hear them talking how they went on vacation instead during that date, then you have something you need to address. But other than that, I wouldn't look for it. Honor system, really. Definitely. I always like to trust the employees until they've proven otherwise about something. So I think taking people's word of honor, if they're going to lie about volunteering, it's bad karma. Like that, then they're going to get that karma back to them, and that is also why you only have a set defined amount of time. It's not unlimited to go and do that. There's generally a bigger issue if you're lying about your volunteers. Yeah, on your page, on your time sheet. And I think, as a cadence, oftentimes we're looking at the handbook and the budgeting process kind of all at the same time annually. So it's nice to have a plan annually, but depending, like Rachel said, on the size of the organization, the size of the endeavor that you're going to tackle, you can pull something together really quickly and or not. It could be a long time, 2-year planning process. It's really dependent on the organization and what they're taking on. Yeah, when you talk about the size of the program, I think that we're talking about smaller things right now, smaller initiatives, but there are bigger, you could start a foundation that, the company could start a foundation. And do you all do consultations for people that are
going through that process?
So on the CFO side, we definitely have companies that we work with that have that interest, and we bring in other trusted advisors, such as their CPA tax people, lawyers who specialize in that, to set up the appropriate structure. So depending on what you want, it could be either a 501c3, a 501c4, it could be a church, it could be a supporting organization. So it's really dependent on the long-term objectives of the endeavor of that organization, as well as the founder of that. So there's so many options, and it's pretty complex, and there's a huge application you go through for the IRS to set that entity up.
Yeah.
So you need a lot of advisors.
Long-term planning, and you know, there's a lot of CEOs, a lot of owners that, you know, company owners that may be interested in setting up a 503c, right? Is that
that's
charitable?
Yeah.
So I believe you have an expert in nonprofits, right, at PBO?
We do. Rick is our expert CFO in nonprofits. The other thing, actually, which ties into our previous podcast, is if you are planning an exit, and there could be a substantial financial impact on your personal, it's really good to talk to advisors, wealth advisors, before you go into a transaction, because you can also set up donor advised funds. You can set up nonprofits in the anticipation of this exit, where you would be donating a substantial amount of what your proceeds in a company if you sold it. So those things often, they take time. And so again, if you're thinking about some sort of a transaction where you will have a significant financial impact on your personal or professional life, again, talk to the wealth advisors, talk to your tax folks, because there are all kinds of structures and funds that you can put your dollars in that can benefit you tax-wise.
That may be a great opportunity for, you know, somebody who is about to retire to still be involved somehow, right? If they're, you know, kind of moving over to the working, you know, to give back to the community. So any other topics that you all would like to, you know, kind of bring up with this? I think there's a lot of different aspects to it, but anything else that, you know, companies should consider?
I just can't stress enough that your culture has to support what it is you're trying to do, because you're gonna upset a lot of employees if it doesn't, and it's not as meaningful.
And this brings a better culture, right?
Yes.
Like that is, I think, really one of the end goals of this, right? Is to give a better company culture, you know, a company culture of giving back to the community, right?
Which is why when you say, how do you know if they really use their voluntary time off for something voluntary, is that it's part of building a culture of trust.
I agree.
I think really the intangible benefit of having these types of programs is that, you know, we're building a culture of working together towards a common goal. We're contributing to our community and our stakeholders, our customers, our clients, our vendors, in a way that's meaningful for all of us. And at the end of the day, that to me is like a huge win. And you can do that in ways that are, you know, you could put a lot of money to it and or not, and or benefit financially or not. It's really, there's so many ways you can look at it, but doing it, I think, has so many benefits. So why not tackle it?
Yeah, and getting the ball rolling. I feel like it's something that, like, every year it picks up steam, right? So like it may start out as one thing and then it'll just grow each year and become a bigger event and a bigger initiative as the years go on. Well, this was a really great, meaningful topic today. Lots of good takeaways, great ideas that people can use. Thank you very much for joining us again, Fran and Rachel. Appreciate your time today. And now for our PBO tip of the week. When someone mentions the minimum wage, the first thing you think of is most likely the lowest amount you can earn for an hour of work. That's about $7.25 an hour in many parts of the country right now, or here in San Diego where I'm at, it's at a whopping $16.85 an hour, which has certainly gotten high recently. But something most people aren't aware of is that there's another minimum wage, and that is the minimum wage for annual salaries. Currently, the minimum salary is a little over $35,000 a year. Some states are higher, but federally, it's just over $35,000 a year right now. Well, that's about to go up, and it's going to go up by quite a lot. On July 1st, the new minimum salary will be just under $44,000 a year. And then on the 1st of the new year, in 2025, it's going to go up to nearly $59,000 a year. That's an increase of over $23,000 a year in less than a year. And businesses are expected to either give their employees a raise to meet that threshold or make them an hourly employee, which I can guarantee you they're not going to appreciate that. So it's important to get ahead of this. If any business has a salary, employees on salary that are less than $59,000 a year, it's best to start figuring out a plan of what you're going to do before this increase goes into effect on July 1st. And here's something else you might not know. In California, if you want to understand how they got the random number of 66,560 for the current minimum salary, all you need to do is double the state's hourly minimum wage, $16 an hour, times 2 is $32 an hour. If you convert that into a yearly full-time salary, you'll get the salaried minimum wage in California. Well, that's all we have for you today. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and maybe even got a little inspired to implement your own volunteer initiative or charity effort for your company. I would like to thank our guests, Brian and Rachel, for joining us today. For more information about PBO Advisory Group, please visit our website at pboadvisory.com. We're also on LinkedIn, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at PBO Advisory Group. And please be sure to subscribe and join us next time as we continue to explore more ways that businesses can drive success.